The morning sun cast long shadows across the conference hall in Cardiff as Prince William adjusted his tie and glanced at his prepared notes. Today's summit on mental health and community support would be different from the countless others he had attended. Today, he planned to share something deeply personal about Wales and what this country meant to him and Catherine. As delegates from across the Commonwealth took their seats, William remembered the nervous excitement he had felt years ago when he first brought Catherine to Wales. It was 2010, and their relationship had been in the spotlight for months. Every magazine cover, every newspaper headline seemed to dissect their romance with the intensity of a scientific experiment. But Wales had offered them something precious and rare, the chance to simply be themselves. The moderator introduced him as the Prince of Wales, a title that still felt both weighty and natural on his shoulders. William stood, looking out at the audience of healthcare workers, community leaders, and young people who represented the future of Wales. These were the people who truly understood what it meant to call this place home. "When I think about Wales," William began, his voice steady but warm, "I don't immediately think of castles or ceremonies or the formal duties that bring me here today. I think of a small cottage in Anglesey, where Catherine and I learned what it meant to build a life together, away from cameras and protocols." The audience leaned forward slightly. This was not the usual royal speech about duty and service, though those themes would certainly emerge. This was something more intimate, more human. William's mind drifted back to those early days on the island. He had been stationed there as a Royal Air Force search and rescue pilot, a job that demanded everything from him but gave him something invaluable in return: normalcy. Catherine had joined him in their rented farmhouse, and for the first time in their relationship, they could wake up in the morning without wondering which photographer might be hiding behind which tree. The cottage itself was nothing remarkable by most standards. Built of local stone with a slate roof that had weathered decades of Atlantic storms, it sat in a field surrounded by sheep who seemed utterly unimpressed by their royal neighbors. There was no staff, no protocol officers, no security detail stationed in the garden. Just two young people learning how to share a bathroom, divide household chores, and navigate the small disagreements that marked the beginning of any real partnership. Catherine had been the one to suggest they try cooking traditional Welsh dishes. Neither of them was particularly skilled in the kitchen, and their first attempt at making call resulted in what William generously described as an interesting interpretation of the recipe. The lamb was slightly tough, the vegetables somewhat overcooked, but they ate every bite while laughing about their culinary ambitions. Those evenings in the cottage kitchen became sacred to them. After long days of training exercises and emergency calls, William would come home to find Catherine reading by the fire or attempting some new recipe she had discovered in a local cookbook. They would talk about everything and nothing: his work, her photography, the landscape around them that seemed to change with each season. The Welsh weather, often dismissed by visitors as relentlessly gray and damp, became part of their rhythm. Rain on the cottage roof provided a soundtrack for quiet evenings. Sudden breaks in the clouds revealed views across the Menai Strait that took their breath away. They learned to dress for the changeable climate and to appreciate the dramatic beauty of storms rolling in from the Irish Sea. William's work with the RAF search and rescue team introduced him to Wales in a way no royal tour ever could. When emergency calls came in, a hiker lost in Snowdonia, a fishing vessel in distress off the coast, a climber injured on the cliffs, he saw the country from above, its geography marked not by political boundaries, but by human need and natural beauty. Each rescue mission revealed something new about the Welsh character: the farmer who walked miles through difficult terrain to guide the rescue team to an injured visitor, the coastal community that mobilized instantly when word came of a boat in trouble, the mountain rescue volunteers who gave up their weekends to help strangers in distress. This was Wales at its most essential: practical, generous, quietly heroic. Catherine often worried during those missions. She would listen to the radio chatter and weather reports, watching the sky for signs of William's return. But she also understood that this work was changing him, giving him a sense of purpose and capability that formal royal duties sometimes couldn't provide. He was serving in a way that felt immediate and meaningful. Their neighbors in Anglesey treated them with a politeness that bordered on protective. Everyone knew who they were, of course, but there seemed to be an unspoken agreement to let them live as normally as possible. The elderly farmer across the field would wave when he saw them walking their dog, but never approached for photographs or conversation unless invited. The woman at the village shop would ask about their day, but never pressed for details about their weekend plans or upcoming travels. This courtesy extended to the local pub, where William and Catherine occasionally joined other young couples for quiet evenings. The conversation was about football and work and local gossip, not royal protocols or international affairs. William discovered he could hold his own in discussions about the merits of different beer varieties and the prospects for the local rugby team. Catherine flourished in this environment. Without the constant scrutiny of London media, she could pursue her photography seriously, capturing landscapes and village life with an artist's eye. She volunteered with local charities and joined a book club run by the village librarian. For the first time since their relationship became public, she could define herself by her own interests and commitments rather than by her connection to the royal family. The cottage became their laboratory for domestic life. They learned each other's habits and preferences in ways that royal residences, with their staff and formal routines, would never have permitted. William discovered that Catherine was remarkably patient with his tendency to leave flying manuals scattered across the kitchen table. Catherine learned that William's idea of helping with laundry involved good intentions and questionable execution. They hosted dinner parties for William's RAF colleagues and their partners, evenings that mixed military shop talk with discussions of local politics and village events. Catherine proved to be a natural hostess, making everyone feel welcome while somehow managing to keep the conversations light, despite the undercurrent of tension that accompanied William's dangerous work. As William continued his remarks to the summit audience, he could see some delegates making notes, others simply listening with the focused attention that good speakers recognize and appreciate. He was sharing something real with them, something that connected his personal experience to the broader themes of community and belonging that had brought them together. Wales gave us the gift of ordinariness, he continued. In a world where every public moment was analyzed and every private moment was sought after by photographers, we found a place where we could simply be a young couple learning to build a life together. The applause was warm but restrained, the kind that acknowledges sincerity rather than performance. William realized he was only beginning to tell this story, and there was so much more to share about those transformative years when Wales became not just a posting or a duty, but truly their first home together. The rhythm of life in Anglesey established itself gradually, like a piece of music that starts quietly and builds to something rich and complex. William's schedule with the RAF was demanding but predictable enough that he and Catherine could plan their life around his shifts and training requirements. On his days off, they explored the island with the enthusiasm of tourists and the growing appreciation of residents. Anglesey revealed itself to be a place of surprising diversity despite its modest size. The dramatic cliffs and hidden beaches along the coast offered solitude and natural beauty that reminded them both why they had fallen in love with Wales. But it was the inland areas, the working farms and small villages, that taught them about Welsh community life. Catherine made friends more easily than William had expected, though he should not have been surprised. She had always possessed the ability to put people at ease, to ask the right questions and listen to the answers with genuine interest. The woman who ran the village post office became a source of local knowledge and occasional advice. The family who owned the nearest farm invited them for Sunday lunch when they learned Catherine was interested in learning about sheep farming. These casual friendships were precious precisely because they were normal. No one was trying to curry favor or gain access to royal circles. People liked Catherine because she was helpful at the village fete, because she remembered to ask about their children, because she could discuss the challenges of maintaining an old house without sounding like she was slumming or playing at ordinary life. William's work brought its own connections. The RAF base was a small community where professionalism mattered more than background. His colleagues judged him by his flying skills, his reliability during emergencies, and his willingness to take on difficult assignments. For perhaps the first time in his life, William was evaluated purely on his competence and character. The rescue missions varied dramatically. Some days brought routine training exercises that honed their skills but tested their patience. Other days erupted with multiple emergency calls that demanded split-second decisions and precise coordination. William learned to read weather patterns with the intensity of someone whose life depended on that knowledge, because it often did. One particularly memorable rescue involved a fishing boat that had lost power in rough seas off the Pembrokeshire coast. The crew of 3 had been struggling against deteriorating conditions for hours before their distress call reached the rescue center. By the time William C. King helicopter reached them, the boat was taking on water, and the crew was preparing to abandon ship. The rescue required delicate maneuvering in high winds and poor visibility. William had to hold the aircraft steady while his crew lowered a rescue swimmer to the boat. Each man had to be winched up individually, a process made treacherous by the unpredictable motion of both the boat and the helicopter. The operation took nearly an hour, during which William's focus never wavered from the instruments and controls that kept them all safe. When they finally landed back at base with all 3 fishermen safe, William felt the deep satisfaction that comes from work well done. But it was Catherine's reaction that evening that truly moved him. She had monitored the radio traffic from their cottage, following the rescue as it unfolded. When he came home, she simply held him for a long moment without speaking. She understood that he had found his calling in these waters and skis. The seasonal changes in Wales became markers of their growing connection to the place. Spring brought lambing season, when their evening walks were accompanied by the sounds of newborn sheep calling for their mothers. Catherine learned to help when farmers needed extra hands with difficult births, and she discovered a practical capability that surprised them both. Summer brought longer days and an influx of tourists who transformed the quiet roads and beaches they had begun to think of as their own. They learned to appreciate the early morning hours when the island belonged to residents, and the landscape showed itself without performance or pretense. Catherine's photography flourished during these summer dawns, capturing images that would later remind them of the profound peace they had found together. Autumn arrived with spectacular colors and the kind of storms that reminded everyone why the Welsh coast demanded respect. William's rescue calls increased as inexperienced hikers underestimated the challenges of Welsh mountains in changing weather. Each mission reinforced his appreciation for local knowledge and the importance of preparation in an unforgiving environment. Winter tested their commitment to Welsh life in ways they had not anticipated. The cottage, charming in summer, proved drafty and expensive to heat when Atlantic gales brought freezing rain and occasional snow. Catherine mastered the art of keeping the fire burning efficiently, while William learned to appreciate the value of proper insulation and weather-resistant clothing. But winter also brought an intimacy to their life together that they treasured. Long evenings by the fire with books and conversation. Weekends spent exploring market towns when the weather permitted, or simply staying home to cook elaborate meals when it did not. They discovered that they genuinely enjoyed each other's company without the distractions of social obligations or public duties. Their relationship deepened in ways that the intense scrutiny of their London life had made difficult. They could have proper arguments about real things, how to manage their budget, whether to accept invitations from neighbors, what kind of dog would suit their lifestyle. These conversations, sometimes heated but always honest, taught them how to navigate disagreement without drama. Catherine's integration into local life accelerated when she volunteered with a charity that supported military families dealing with deployment stress. Her background with William's career gave her credibility with wives and partners who were struggling with the unique challenges of loving someone whose job involved regular risk. She learned to listen without offering easy solutions and to provide practical support without condescension. The charity work also connected her to a network of women whose lives revolved around military service in various ways. Some were career servicewomen themselves. Others were civilian professionals who had married into military life. All understood the particular strains of balancing personal relationships with demanding careers that served the public good. William began to understand that Catherine's adaptation to Wales was teaching her skills she would need for royal life, though neither of them spoke about their future in explicit terms. She was learning to represent herself, and by extension, him in community settings. She was developing the confidence that comes from being valued for her own contributions rather than her connections. Their social life expanded carefully and organically. They became part of a group that included other young couples from the base and the surrounding communities. Weekend gatherings often featured hiking in Snowdonia or sailing in the calmer waters around the island. These friendships were built on shared interests and mutual respect rather than social climbing or networking. The group provided William with something he had rarely experienced, the opportunity to be the least important person in a room, at least in terms of public status. When they debated football teams or planned group vacations, His opinion carried weight because of his knowledge and personality, not his title. It was both humbling and liberating. Catherine's comfort in these social settings impressed everyone who met her. She could discuss hiking gear with the same enthusiasm she brought to conversations about local history or international affairs. She never seemed to be performing or adapting her personality to fit the situation. She had found her authentic self in the Welsh landscape and community. As William continued his address to the summit, he could see that his audience was beginning to understand the deeper message behind his personal reflections. Wales had not simply been a convenient posting or a romantic retreat. It had been the place where he and Catherine learned to be partners in the truest sense, preparing them for the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. The mountain rescue call came on a Tuesday evening in late October, just as William and Catherine had settled down for dinner. The weather had been deteriorating throughout the day, with high winds and driving rain that made flying conditions marginal at best. When the alert sounded, William's training took over, but Catherine could see the concern in his eyes as he gathered his gear. A group of university students from Manchester had been hiking in Snowdonia when one of them fell and suffered what appeared to be serious leg injuries. They were stranded on a narrow ledge approximately halfway up one of the more challenging routes, with darkness approaching and conditions worsening by the hour. The Wales Air Ambulance was grounded due to weather, leaving the RAF as the only hope for immediate extraction. Catherine kissed him goodbye at the door, a ritual they had developed that acknowledged the danger without dwelling on it. She would spend the evening monitoring radio traffic and weather reports, a practice that had become second nature during their time in Wales. It was one of the more difficult aspects of their life together, the waiting and wondering that accompanied his most dangerous missions. The rescue operation proved to be one of the most challenging of William's career. The combination of high winds, limited visibility, and difficult terrain made every aspect of the mission dangerous. The rescue team had to approach the stranded hikers from an angle that provided minimal room for error, hovering the helicopter in position while crew members rappelled down to assess the situation. What they found was worse than the initial reports had suggested. The injured student had compound fractures in both legs and was showing signs of hypothermia. His companions were exhausted and inadequately equipped for the overnight exposure they would face if rescue was delayed until morning. The decision was made to attempt immediate evacuation despite the challenging conditions. William had to hold the aircraft steady in gusting winds while his crew worked to secure the injured hiker, and then, one by one, extract his companions from the ledge. Each winch operation took precious time, and fuel levels were becoming a concern as the mission stretched into its second hour. But abandoning the rescue was not an option with injured people depending on their skill and determination. The successful completion of the mission came just as weather conditions deteriorated beyond the safe operating limits. All 5 hikers were delivered to hospital, where the injured student received surgery that likely saved his leg. But for William, the real impact of the rescue came in the days that followed, when he received a letter from the parents of the injured young man. The letter was simple and heartfelt, thanking him and his crew for risking their own safety to save their son. But it was the final paragraph that stayed with him. "We know you didn't have to take those risks for a stranger, but you did it anyway because that's what service means. Our son wants to become a doctor now because he says he wants to help people the way you helped him." Catherine found William reading the letter for the 3rd time when she came home from her volunteer work that evening. They talked about the mission and its aftermath, discussing how his royal background had prepared him for public service, but how his RAF experience was teaching him about service in its most immediate and personal form. These conversations revealed the depth of character that had drawn them together initially and was now being shaped by their shared life in Wales. They were both discovering that service was not about grand gestures or ceremonial duties, but about showing up consistently for work that mattered, even when it was difficult or dangerous. The approach of winter brought changes to their routine that tested their commitment to Welsh life in new ways. The cottage that had been perfectly comfortable during the warmer months became a daily challenge to keep warm and dry. The romantic idea of evenings by the fireplace gave way to the reality of constantly feeding wood into the stove and dealing with occasional power outages during storms. But these practical challenges also brought unexpected rewards. They became more self-sufficient and resourceful, learning to solve problems together rather than calling for assistance. Catherine mastered the art of cooking hearty meals on a budget, while William became surprisingly handy at basic home maintenance and repair. Their social life adapted to the season as well. Instead of hiking and outdoor activities, they spent more time in local pubs and community centers where winter events brought neighbors together. Catherine joined a book club that met monthly in the village library, while William participated in a darts league that included farmers, shop owners, and other RAF personnel. These activities might have seemed mundane to observers, but they were profoundly meaningful to a couple learning to build a life based on shared values rather than shared obligations. They were discovering that happiness could be found in routine, in small communities, in work that served others, and in the simple pleasure of coming home to someone who understood both your struggles and your aspirations. The winter months also brought a different perspective on their relationship with the media and public attention. The British press, frustrated by the lack of dramatic stories from their Welsh life, had largely moved on to other subjects. This respite allowed them to focus on each other and their community without the constant awareness of being watched and judged. Catherine's confidence grew notably during this period. Without photographers analyzing her every outfit or commentators dissecting her every public appearance, she could develop her own sense of style and purpose. She became known locally for her practical approach to charity work and her genuine interest in Welsh culture and history. William observed these changes with growing admiration and love. He was seeing Catherine not as the woman who might someday be his wife, but as the partner with whom he was already building a meaningful life. Their relationship was being tested not by external pressures, but by the ordinary challenges that face any young couple learning to navigate adult responsibilities together. The military community at RAF Valley provided them with examples of couples who had successfully balanced demanding careers with strong marriages. They learned from older couples who had survived multiple deployments and transfers, and they supported younger couples who were just beginning their own journeys in military life. These relationships taught them that successful partnerships required both independence and interdependence. Each person needed to maintain their own interests and capabilities while also building shared goals and mutual support. It was a delicate balance that required constant communication and adjustment. William's flying skills continued to improve throughout the winter months, earning him the respect of instructors and colleagues who were known for their high standards. He was developing the kind of competence that comes only from extensive practice under challenging conditions. Each successful mission built his confidence and deepened his commitment to the work. Catherine's photography project, documenting life in rural Wales, began to attract attention from galleries in London and Cardiff. Her images captured both the dramatic beauty of the landscape and the quiet dignity of the people who called it home. The project gave her a creative outlet that was entirely her own, separate from her connection to William and his career. As winter gave way to early spring, they began to discuss their future together more explicitly. The conversation was prompted partly by practical considerations. William's RAF commitment was scheduled to end within the year, but also by their growing certainty that they wanted to build a permanent life together. The discussions were serious but not somber. They had learned to talk about difficult subjects with honesty and humor, skills that would serve them well in the challenges ahead. They were no longer the somewhat uncertain couple who had arrived in Wales 2 years earlier. They had become partners in the fullest sense, tested by real challenges and strengthened by shared purpose. Their last spring in Anglesey was bittersweet. They knew their time there was limited, which made every sunset walk and quiet evening more precious. But they also understood that Wales had given them something permanent, a foundation for their relationship that would sustain them through whatever came next. As William reached this point in his summit address, he paused to look directly at several young couples in the audience. His message was becoming clear. The ordinary moments, the daily choices, the commitment to serve something larger than themselves, these were the building blocks of both strong relationships and meaningful lives. The proposal conversation happened gradually, like many of their most important discussions during their Welsh years. It was not a single dramatic moment, but rather a series of conversations over several weeks as William's RAF service drew toward its conclusion. They both understood that leaving Wales would mark a transition not just in location, but in the nature of their relationship and their public responsibilities. Catherine had been characteristically practical about the situation. She knew that their engagement would transform her from a private citizen into a public figure overnight. The quiet anonymity they had enjoyed in Wales would become impossible to maintain. But she had also seen how William had grown during their time together, how he had developed confidence in his ability to serve effectively while maintaining his authentic personality. The actual proposal took place during one of their favorite walks, along the coastal path that had become their regular evening route when weather permitted. It was a crisp April evening with clear skies and the kind of light that photographers dream of capturing. William had been carrying his grandmother's engagement ring for several days, waiting for the right moment that felt natural rather than staged. When he finally asked her to marry him, Catherine's response was immediate and joyful. But what followed was not the breathless excitement that tabloid readers might have expected. Instead, they sat on a fallen log overlooking the sea and talked seriously about what they were choosing together. They discussed the challenges they would face, the loss of privacy, the weight of expectations, and their determination to maintain the partnership they had built in Wales. The announcement of their engagement several weeks later prompted a media frenzy that reminded them both of why their Welsh interlude had been so precious. Photographers camped outside their cottage, helicopters circled overhead, and every neighbor was approached for comments and insights. The peaceful life they had constructed was suddenly on display for the world to examine and analyze. But the response from their Welsh friends and neighbors was different from what they encountered elsewhere. Local people expressed genuine happiness for them while maintaining the respectful distance that had characterized their relationships from the beginning. The farmer across the field left a bottle of champagne and a simple note of congratulations on their doorstep. The woman from the village shop mentioned their engagement warmly but briefly during their next visit, then asked about their weekend plans as if nothing fundamental had changed. This response reinforced what they had learned about Welsh character during their years there. People understood the difference between public celebration and private intrusion. They could honor significant moments without demanding access to every detail or claiming ownership of someone else's happiness. William's final months with RAF Valley were marked by a sense of completion rather than mere conclusion. He had achieved genuine competence as a search and rescue pilot, earning commendations for several particularly challenging missions. His colleagues organized a farewell celebration that focused on his contributions to the team rather than his royal status, a distinction that meant more to him than any formal recognition could have provided. Catherine's farewell to Wales was more complex and emotional. She had invested more of herself in local relationships and community activities, building friendships that felt genuine and important. The charity work she had undertaken had given her insights into social issues that would prove valuable in her future royal role. But more importantly, it had shown her that she could make meaningful contributions through careful listening and practical support. Her photography project had evolved into a comprehensive documentation of rural Welsh life that would eventually be published as a book, with proceeds supporting local charities. The work had given her confidence in her artistic abilities and provided a model for how she might use creative projects to support causes she cared about in the future. Their last week in the cottage was spent packing memories as much as belongings. Every room held associations with their growth as individuals and as a couple. The kitchen where they had learned to cook together and host friends. The sitting room where they had spent countless evenings talking about everything from daily concerns to life philosophies. The bedroom where they had comforted each other after difficult days and celebrated good news together. The cottage had been witness to arguments and reconciliations, moments of doubt and periods of certainty, the ordinary domestic negotiations that teach couples how to build a life together. It had provided a safe space for them to discover who they were when stripped of external pressures and expectations. Their departure from Wales was deliberately low-key. They had learned to value privacy and wanted to leave as quietly as they had lived. A few close friends gathered for a final dinner, sharing memories and expressing hopes for continued friendship despite the changes ahead. William's RAF colleagues organized a brief ceremony that honored his service while acknowledging that his future duties would take him in different directions. The drive away from Anglesey was emotional for both of them. Catherine cried quietly as they passed familiar landmarks, the village shop where she had bought flowers every Friday, the pub where they had spent so many pleasant evenings, the coastal path where they had walked through every season and every kind of weather. William found himself memorizing details he had not consciously noticed before, storing images that would help him remember not just what Wales looked like, but how it had felt to call it home. But their sadness was tempered by gratitude and excitement. Wales had given them the foundation they needed for the challenges ahead. They had learned to trust each other completely, to communicate honestly even about difficult subjects, and to maintain their individual identities while building shared goals and values. More importantly, their Welsh experience had taught them that service was not a burden, but a privilege. William's rescue work had shown him the immediate satisfaction that comes from using one's skills to help others in crisis. Catherine's volunteer work had revealed her capacity for making genuine connections across social and economic boundaries. Both had discovered that meaningful work was energizing rather than draining when it aligned with personal values and capabilities. The transition from Wales to royal life was managed carefully, with support from palace staff who understood the significance of what William and Catherine had accomplished during their time away. They had proved that they could build a successful partnership under challenging circumstances, that they could contribute meaningfully to their communities, and that they could maintain their authentic selves while accepting public responsibilities. Their engagement period was spent largely in London, adjusting to the reality of constant public attention and formal protocols. But they carried with them the lessons learned in Wales, the importance of making time for private conversation, the value of work that directly serves others, the strength that comes from facing challenges together with honesty and humor. The wedding planning process tested these lessons in new ways. Every decision was analyzed by media commentators and debated by people who had never met them. The simple life they had enjoyed in Wales seemed very far away as they navigated questions about guest lists, ceremonial details, and security arrangements that affected thousands of people. But in quiet moments, they would recall evening walks along the Welsh coast or Sunday mornings in their cottage kitchen, reminding themselves of who they had become during those precious years of relative freedom. Wales had not just been a romantic retreat or a convenient posting. It had been their university in partnership, their laboratory for building a marriage that could withstand the unique pressures of royal life. As William continued his address to the summit audience, he could see that many delegates were taking notes or sharing meaningful glances with colleagues. His story was resonating not just as royal history, but as an example of how couples can use challenging circumstances to strengthen their relationship and clarify their shared purpose. William's voice took on a more reflective tone as he approached the conclusion of his remarks to the summit. The audience had been with him through the journey from nervous young man to confident partner, and now he wanted to help them understand how those Welsh lessons continued to influence his approach to royal duties and family life. The Wales that Catherine and I left in 2013 was not the same Wales we had discovered in 2010, he continued. The place hadn't changed, of course. The mountains were still there, the communities were still strong, the landscape was still breathtaking. But we had changed. We had learned to see Wales not as tourists or even as temporary residents, but as people whose lives had been genuinely shaped by Welsh values and Welsh experiences. The years since leaving Anglesey had brought exactly the challenges and opportunities they had anticipated. The intense media scrutiny, the formal protocols, the weight of public expectations, all of these had tested the foundation they had built during their Welsh years. But that foundation had proved solid enough to support not just their marriage, but their growing family and expanding responsibilities. Their return visits to Wales had become opportunities to reconnect with the lessons learned during their formative years there. When they brought Prince George and Princess Charlotte to Wales for the first time, William and Catherine were eager to show their children the landscape and communities that had meant so much to them. They wanted their children to understand that Wales was not just another royal destination, but a place where their parents had learned to be partners and where they had discovered the true meaning of service. The children's reactions to Wales had been immediate and enthusiastic. George was fascinated by the sheep farming operations and asked endless questions about how animals were cared for during different seasons. Charlotte was captivated by the coastal scenery and collected shells with the same intensity Catherine had once brought to her photography. Both children seemed to sense that Wales held special significance for their parents, even if they could not yet understand the full story. These family visits reinforced William's conviction that Wales had given him and Catherine something invaluable, a model for how to maintain authenticity while accepting public responsibility. The Welsh people they had known continued to treat them with warmth, but without excessive deference. Children called out greetings from school playgrounds. Farmers waved from their tractors. Shop owners asked about the family with genuine interest, but without intrusion. This balance between recognition and normalcy was exactly what William hoped to achieve in his broader royal duties. Wales had taught him that effective public service required genuine connection with people rather than mere ceremonial appearances. The rescue missions had shown him that real leadership meant sharing risks and responsibilities, not simply giving orders from a safe distance. Catherine's evolution during their Welsh years had been equally significant, but perhaps more challenging to navigate in their subsequent royal life. In Wales, she had discovered her capacity for independent thought and action, her ability to contribute meaningfully to community life, her talent for making genuine connections across social boundaries. Translating those abilities into royal duties required careful adaptation, but the core capabilities remained unchanged. Her approach to royal engagements reflected lessons learned during Welsh charity work. She listened more than she spoke, asked practical questions rather than making ceremonial statements, and followed up on commitments with the thoroughness she had developed during her volunteer work in Anglesey. The authenticity that had served her well in Welsh communities proved equally effective in her broader royal role. William's work on mental health issues, which had become one of his primary focuses, was directly influenced by experiences during his RAF service. The rescue missions had shown him the psychological impact of trauma and crisis, while his relationships with military colleagues had revealed the importance of peer support and professional counseling. His advocacy for mental health services was grounded in personal observation rather than abstract policy preferences. The couple's approach to parenting also reflected their Welsh experience. They were determined to give their children exposure to ordinary life alongside their royal responsibilities. George and Charlotte attended local schools, participated in normal childhood activities, and were encouraged to develop friendships based on shared interests rather than social status. These decisions sometimes created security and protocol challenges, but William and Catherine remained committed to providing their children with experiences similar to those that had shaped their own growth in Wales. Their marriage had been tested by the pressures that come with royal life, the constant travel, the public scrutiny, the weight of representing national institutions. But the communication skills and mutual trust developed during their Welsh years had proved resilient enough to handle these challenges. They had learned to protect their private relationship while fulfilling their public duties, to support each other through difficult periods while maintaining their individual identities. The cottage in Anglesey had been sold years earlier, but William sometimes drove past it when royal duties brought him to the area. The new owners had maintained the property well, and the sheep still grazed in the surrounding fields. But what struck him most was how ordinary it looked compared to the royal residences that were now his homes. It was a reminder that the most significant growth often happens in the most unremarkable settings. His relationship with Wales had evolved beyond personal nostalgia to become a model for how he approached his role as Prince of Wales. The title carried historical weight and constitutional significance, but William wanted it to represent genuine connection and mutual respect rather than mere ceremonial authority. His Welsh years had shown him that effective leadership required understanding and serving people's actual needs, rather than simply maintaining traditional forms. The summit audience was completely engaged now, recognizing that William's personal story contained broader lessons about leadership, service, and the importance of authentic relationships. Several delegates had stopped taking notes and were simply listening, caught up in a narrative that connected personal growth to public responsibility in ways that felt both inspiring and achievable. Wales taught us that service is not something you perform, William concluded, but something you live. It's not about grand gestures or ceremonial moments, though those have their place. Real service happens in daily choices, in showing up consistently for work that matters, in treating every person you encounter with dignity and respect, regardless of their status or your own. He paused, looking out at faces that reflected understanding and appreciation. These were people who had chosen careers in public service, who understood the challenges and rewards of dedicating one's life to helping others. They recognized truth when they heard it. Catherine and I return to Wales regularly, not just because royal duties require it, but because we genuinely love this country and these people. Wales gave us our foundation as a couple, our understanding of what marriage could be when built on shared values and mutual respect. But more than that, Wales taught us what it means to belong to a community, to contribute something meaningful, to find purpose in service to others. The applause was sustained and heartfelt, the kind that acknowledges not just a good speech, but a meaningful sharing of experience. William had succeeded in connecting his personal story to the broader themes of the summit, showing how individual growth and public service could reinforce each other when guided by authentic values and genuine commitment. As delegates began to approach him with questions and comments, William reflected on how far he had traveled from the nervous young man who had first brought Catherine to Wales more than a decade earlier. The journey had been marked by challenges and growth, by ordinary moments that proved extraordinary in their cumulative impact. Wales had been their beginning, and in many ways it remained their true north, the place where they had learned who they could become together, and the standard by which they measured all their subsequent choices and commitments.